Welcome to Wellness Wednesdays, usually, but today we're doing a Mental Health Monday. I'm Dr. Thema, licensed psychologist, researcher, professor, and advocate. And I am so glad that you are here with us on today. We're going to be talking about leadership, considering our values, the necessity of balance, and attending to context. I'm excited that we have a wonderful group of panelists that are joining us on today. The first one is Dr. Gordon C. Nagayama Hall, who is Emeritus Professor of Psychology in the Clinical Psychology program at the University of Oregon. He previously was a professor of psychology at Penn State University and Kent State University, and was a psychologist at Western State Hospital in Washington State. His mother and family were incarcerated in Arizona during World War II because they were Japanese Americans. Dr. Hall received his PhD in clinical psychology from Fuller Theological Seminary. He served as president of the American Psychological Association, Society for the Psychological Study of Ethnic Minority Issues, Division 45, and as president of the Asian American Psychological Association. He authored the textbook Multicultural Psychology and was editor of Cultural Diversity and Ethnic Minority Psychology. Dr. Hall's honors include the Stanley Sue Award for Distinguished Contributions to Diversity from the APA Division of Clinical Psychology, which is Division 12, and the Lifetime Achievement Award from APA Division 45. His research interests are in culture and mental health, with a particular interest in Asian Americans. He is developing a problem-solving therapy app for Asian Americans. His 3-year-old granddaughter, Emiko, says, Chi-chan, Grandpa is a good guy. Welcome, Dr. Gordy. Glad that you're here with us today.
Thanks.
And our next guest is Dr. Melinda García. Dr. Garcia is a clinical, community, and organizational psychologist of Indigenous, Mexican, and Panamanian, European, and African descent. She has over 45 years experience in a variety of settings, including inpatient, outpatient, communities, organizations, and academia. She has many specialties because she's very curious and always trying to puzzle out how everything relates to everything else. She enjoys sharing what she's learned with others in ways that are immediately applicable. Her approach is intentionally decolonial and integrates Indigenous, Western, and Buddhist approaches to health. As a woman of color, she had to get way more degrees, certificates, apprenticeships, and advanced trainings than is reasonable in order to be considered an expert. To honor her elders and ancestors, she is a mentor, a musician, a seamstress, a beater, a writer, a storyteller, an activist, a ceremony leader, and a frustrated gardener. She is an independent practice in Albuquerque, New Mexico. If she really likes you, she might take you to the New Mexico State Fair Blue Ribbon. Bring you the cookies. Welcome. So glad that you're here.
Thank you, Thema.
All right. And our final panelist is Dr. Wendy, as she is affectionately called. She speaks truth to vulnerability in an effort to access the real strength and magic gestating in Black women and girls. Her work is accessible in popular media spaces like ebony.com, blackdoctors.com, and Now This Media, as well as in scholarly journals and books in the fields of psychology and education. Her current work focuses on the leadership legacy of Black women and the experiences of Black women in work contexts. These themes are evident in her anticipated new book, Black Women at Work, scheduled to be released in fall 2022, and her podcast, She Been Ready, which unleashes the stories of Black women leaders grounded in what she calls auntie-isms or auntie wisdoms, providing lessons in leadership and voice for Black women and girls and those, their bosses, their teachers, their parents and friends, who seek to cultivate the environments in which their magic and magnificent can be realized. Dr. Wendy has been entrusted with key national and institutional leadership roles. She is the current Dean of School of Education at Mills College in Oakland, California, the past president of the Society for the Psychology of Women, Division 35 of the American Psychological Association, and she sits on the National Board of Girls Leadership, an organization that teaches girls to exercise the power of their voice through programs grounded in socio-emotional learning. Welcome, Dr. Wendy.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Oh, I am so excited for this all-star gathering, and I have so much appreciation and gratitude for each of you and the ways in which you show up in the leadership space. And I want to start off really considering the intersection or the ways in which our psychology education or training may prepare us in particular ways for leadership roles. And I will start with you, Dr. Gordy. What would you say, in what ways has your psychological education or training enhanced you as a leader?
So I have to say that my psychological training didn't really prepare me to be a leader. I was trained as a clinical psychologist and as a therapist and as a researcher. And that training didn't really translate that well into leadership. I think what really did prepare me for leadership is my cultural background that values relationships, working with others, respecting others, and being part of a community or a team. And so that's really what prepared me. So I guess, the question might be, how did you get involved in leadership if you weren't prepared for it? And it was out of necessity. I got recruited to be a leader in different situations because there was a need. And over time, I've learned to be more selective about when I'm asked to be a leader and who I'm being asked to lead and what the situation is. And often in institutional settings, particularly white institutional settings, leaders of color are asked to come in and clean up a mess. And my friend and colleague, Thomas Parham, who's president of Cal State Dominguez Hills, years ago at an APA town hall, was in discussion with one of the white leaders of APA. And this leader of APA said, well, we need people of color to speak up and help us with our problems. And Thomas said that people of color have been cleaning up the houses of white people for centuries. And so it's time for white people to clean their own house. So that quote stuck with me for decades and has guided the types of leadership situations that I've chosen. So if I'm asked to come in and clean up someone else's mess, that's very different than being recruited to be a leader among people who want to follow and want to work as a team.
Oh, thank you so much for that. And it is an excellent reflection for those of us in education or training to think about what are the roles that we prepare people for. And, as you said, you may prepare people to be a practitioner, you may prepare them to be a researcher, but in what ways, if any, are we attending to cultivating leadership? And then the beautiful part about learning it really from your cultural community and really highlighting the importance for us not to leave ourselves behind or to think that we're just coming with blank slates ready to be poured into by the field, but that there are some pieces that we come with. There's a African name, Intazaki Shange, which means she who comes with her own things, right? So in some ways that you arrived knowing some things, some important pieces that have served you in leadership. Thank you for sharing that. And Dr. Melinda, what about for you?
I was really struck while Gordy was talking that there's a lot of similarities, that I don't think that my schooling in psychology really prepared me for leadership, except to the extent where I needed to speak up on my own behalf and behalf of other students of color. But my undergraduate degrees are in psychology, and I have another bachelor's degree in political science. And so I feel like my degree in political science prepared me a lot more for leadership than my training in psychology. Learning strategy, learning different ways of organizing groups that came from political science. That did not come from psychology at all. But also I think what prepared me for leadership was in my mother's family. My mother's Panamanian, my father's of Mexican descent. And in my mother's family were educators and were instrumental in bringing public education to the whole country of Panama. There had been public education in Panama up through elementary school, through grade 6. And my grandfather's siblings, 3 of them, were educators and were instrumental in bringing public education from 6 through 12 to the country outside of the capital city. And they were also instrumental in starting the University of Panama. So, with that kind of history, I was like, sure, you see a need for something? Well, figure it out, go do. And so that was from my family. And then the last thing was that in Indigenous families, everybody has gifts, and there's not gifts that are better or worse than other gifts. But my particular gift, sometimes my family was upset with me about the gift, and I think people that I've worked with, like Wendy, have seen the double edge of this, is asking questions. I ask the uncomfortable questions. So the people who ask the uncomfortable questions, if I can't stand it, I raise my hand and I'm like, and what about that? And what about that? And so because of that, oftentimes a group would go, well, you ask the questions, you be the leader. And so,
yes.
But it didn't come from psychology.
Right. So that is powerful, both the political science piece of it and thinking strategically. And, as leaders, that's necessary. And then this piece, I'm going to refer to as both insight and courage, right? Because when you're asking a question, it's because you're seeing something or noting something that other people may be overlooking. And then that willingness, as you said, like, I didn't mean to, like, I have to say something. I need to ask this question. And so then that positions you for leadership because of that, both insight and willingness to speak. So yes, thank you for that. And I'm so glad you named this Indigenous piece of in the family or community, recognizing that everyone has gifts and to appreciate those diverse gifts that people are coming with, including children. All right, Dr. Wendy, what would you say, if anything?
I know. It's such a rich offering already.
Yeah.
I think I would say, actually, I work in the field of education and actually insert a lot of psychological understanding, others as well, there's a rich and long history, and we all walk with many people behind us and in front of us, right, that we're moving forward and toward. But I find that my background and my preparation in the field actually is quite helpful, particularly around making the connections to the core value of the vulnerability of each human being who's in front of you, and leading from a place of respecting that and holding each of us with integrity in that space and modeling that. And also, I would say, encouraging it. I lead a predominantly white institution, right? I'm in one of those spaces that Gordy talked about. And I think that is very powerful, what was said about that, to not only be used, but to take and make use of the spaces that you're in for the purposes that you have and what your calling is or what your light is. And that is what I try to do. And I think one of the things that can happen in academia in particular, and in education as well, pre-K throughout, is a type of unlearning of who you are, and how important then it is, as at least in my work in preparing teachers and educators who work with very small children and children all the way up through adult learners as well, is to honor who's in front of us, right? To honor that learner, to honor that leader who's in front of us. I really do believe that we already walk with leadership, and that's why I've gotten involved in some of the organizations that I have, particularly around women and girls, and supporting them to not think that they have to have that trained into them. We all are born with our gift, as Melinda said, comes from her community tradition. And I believe that, and you lead with that. And it's each of us leading from that space, I believe, that creates the diversity of, what we can do as teams and organizations and as communities. So for me, I think it's a matter of legitimizing the humanity and the vulnerability, particularly in spaces that don't allow it, or that tell us that that's not professional or that's not appropriate, and say, no, being human is entirely appropriate, actually, wherever humans are, the ways that humans need to be. And so how do we cultivate and create those spaces there? And I think that my training as a psychologist actually does lend itself to supporting spaces that don't necessarily move with that same understanding around complexity.
Yes. Things. Oh, that is so beautiful and so necessary when we think about dehumanization and framed as professionalism, right? That kind of disconnect. And so I've even heard, I think it was Dr. Jaya John frame it as rehumanizing, right? Or creating space for our humanity and the ways in which that builds relationship, connection, and leadership. And in your role, also being in a diverse setting in which you would be among those who are underrepresented, but bringing in that skill set that you come with, and being attuned to that. Because I think that is a piece that sometimes we are not even aware of what we know. What I tell our graduate students is they're surrounded by each other. And so sometimes if I, let's say, bring them to South Los Angeles and have them do a workshop with me, they may take for granted that kind of jargon. And it's like, no, you have to say it more clearly so that everybody can get what you're saying. And so being aware of the things that we know and how we can contribute that in particular spaces. So thank you for sharing that. I'm wondering, because you mentioned the word values, which was my next question. So I'll start with you. We lead from a place, we are value led. And so I wonder if you can share, what is one of your values that you bring to your leadership style, and what does that look like?
I value authenticity. And I think that it actually connects to what we were just talking about, actually, that particularly in spaces where you are one of a few or even the only one, it's actually really important and a manifestation of your leadership to be your whole self, and to not, conform. And again, those educational spaces and professional spaces might push us to do that, especially our students. I notice often how important it is to encourage my students. I'll say things like, and so an example of this would be working with a student, actually, when I began at Mills a few years back, worked with an African-American woman who wanted to impress me because I was a new dean, and she was going to begin to do some work with me and wanted me to support her in her dissertation research at some point. And so was really trying to cultivate a relationship. And so she was doing that thing where she was fumbling over her words because she was thinking too much about what she was about to say, because she was trying to, manage my impression of her. And I said to her, this may be one of the few times that you don't have to do that. And I really want you to be your whole Black self right now. You could really do the whole thing, and I will take all of her. It may not always be true, or you may not always feel it to be true, but I think I need to say it directly to you right now. And you may still feel like you can't, and I get the socialization, but we're going to be together for the whole year, and you really can. You can do it. And, that's remember that movie, Get Out? Did you all watch that?
Yes.
Yeah. So then, I love that film because it was one of those ways in which they, the filmmakers made it real plain, like you were saying, for your students in doing community work. And so, I think that there's one of those ways in which academia is a place in which sometimes our students are experiencing that sunken place as well. And so whatever we can do to help them not be there, I think we need to be forward with that. And so that was one of my ways of pressing forward my authenticity, showing myself to her, but also saying, I welcome yours too.
Yeah. Oh, I love that example. And it in that case being made explicit.
Yeah.
Right. Because sometimes we have a value, right, kind of internally and hoping it shows up, but to give that permission, and especially in your role as someone who's holding power in that space and, being able to speak to it with compassion, but also kind of liberating, right? Because it is, draining, exhausting, feeling like you have to be in a role for this extended amount of time, right? So thank you for that. And Dr. Melinda, which value would you like to share about?
I was thinking that the value that I would like to share is it's very related to authenticity. But it also includes not leaving people behind. And I'm not sure how I would put that in one word, but particularly say if I'm in a group of as a grad student or as somebody who is teaching or somebody who's representing, I want to make sure that all of my relatives are included and none of my relatives gets left behind. And I'm using relatives the way Indigenous people use relatives, but I think that other ethnic groups use it similarly. It's like not just blood relatives, but ethnic and cultural relatives as well. I do not want to leave my relatives behind. And sometimes a lot of times, people who have been brainwashed by Western education will think I'm not good enough or I have to be perfect in order to speak up. And I'm like, oh no, there's so much power in being your authentic self. So I want the whole group to be authentic and I don't want anybody left behind.
Yeah.
So, I want us to show up as ourselves and not get left behind.
Beautiful. And so important, and pushing up against this kind of leadership notion of competition, where it is like for me to shine and for me to shine, it is to like cover the light of everyone else, right? Or cover the gifts of everyone else. But as you're saying, like leaving none of that, leaving no one.
Well, because as you know, as everyone on this call knows, if you're trying to be a leader by yourself, it's exhausting. You cannot do it.
That's right.
Cannot do it. So even when I've done major actions, say on the floor of council, I wasn't doing it by myself.
Right.
There were people in the room who were supporting me. But when I was at the mic, I also felt that all of my ancestors were supporting me. Yes. I had an auditorium full of ancestors right behind me with their hands on my shoulders supporting me. So I wasn't talking for me. I'm talking for all of us.
That's right. So important. And there are times, no matter what your work setting is, that when you're walking into that place, needing to be reminded that you're not by yourself, right? That you come in and there is a flood with you. So yeah, thank you for naming that. Dr. Gordy, what value would you like to talk about?
So the value that I think is important in leadership is community, and that's very much related to what Melinda just said. And in terms of, I guess, the training that I got in leadership, some of it was from my church when I was young, the Japanese Presbyterian Church. So our pastor, Reverend Richard Nishioka, also had been incarcerated during World War II because he was Japanese American, as my mother was. In fact, they were actually in the same camp, although he was years younger. But what he did as a leader was to empower people and to help them develop their gifts and share them. So I was in high school, and he and the other church leaders had me become what's called an elder in the Presbyterian Church, which is a leader. So I was basically on the church board as a high school student, and they saw the potential in me and wanted to include me and include younger people, and to realize that the future was not with the people who were old but with the younger people. And certainly older people were included too. So I think this idea of community is important. And a few years ago, I was asked by a colleague to participate in this leadership institute, and they asked me a similar question: what is your view or vision of leadership? And I said there's three components: be a good person, work hard, and get famous. And I think they thought I was kidding, so they didn't ask me to do this, which I was kind of relieved. But what I meant by that is that being a good person is about relationships. You establish relationships, you include everyone, as Melinda was saying, and you help people to develop their gifts, and leadership is shared. And then working hard involves everybody doing their part, contributing, carrying their weight. And then the get famous part was sort of tongue in cheek. But the idea there is that if you work at your relationships, if you help create a sense of community, and you have a reputation for working hard, you'll get a good reputation as a leader and as a member of the community.
Oh, beautiful. I love that. And, it speaks to so many themes. One of the pieces I'm glad that you picked up on is some of the training or preparation coming out of your faith community. And that has been a part of my journey as well. I'm a part of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And growing up, there was an organization that's called the Young People's Department. And when you're a member of, if you're a child or a teen, you have to have your own governance, and you have meetings and you plan events. And so it was funny to me when I was elected to be president for Division 35, Society for the Psychology of Women. I was at the time the youngest president that had been elected. And someone asked, how did you already know how to run a meeting? So I said, I've been running meetings since I was like 10 years old. So it is rich, the different opportunities that our young people can have in different spaces and places where we can learn how to navigate and lead. And I also appreciate what you said about the working hard. I remember a panel on women in leadership for APA, and most of the women on the panel were talking about how you have to assert yourself and, kind of nominate yourself, advocate for yourself. And Dr. Jean Chen, who has passed away, shared in her testimonial that for her, it was really about working hard. She said, let your work speak for you. And when you work, people will ask you to lead. And so I appreciate you naming that reality as well. I want to, as I speak about working hard, I then want to shift or be inclusive of the need for balance. And so as I think about it, we work in a collective, but we are individuals. And as Dr. Wendy said, individuals who are aware of our own humanity or our own limitation. And so this time I'll start with Dr. Melinda, how you approach balance or trying to maintain some sense of balance, if that even is the phrase for you in your leadership.
Um, in traditional Nahuatl culture, I'm gonna bring this up to the camera because I don't know if you could see it. This
Yes.
is called, that symbol is called an Olin, Ollin. And it is one of the most sacred symbols in Nahuatl culture, and it means movement into balance and harmony.
Mm,
And it's on my card.
mm,
It's on my letterhead.
beautiful.
It's on because in my training in traditional medicine and traditional and ceremony, that is central to everything.
Mm,
Now, what I do want to say, because I recently had a conversation with one of my mentees about this, is that when we work hard, those of us who uh, it's not even that we aspire to leadership. It's kind of like we just kind of got put into leadership roles, and then after that we're like, okay, well then I'll take this leadership role, or this one fits with my professional trajectory. But for many of us, we develop illnesses. We'll develop hives or high blood pressure or an immune disorder. And the balance and the harmony comes in recognizing those things as our internal smoke alarm, that we're actually working too much,
mm,
that we need to be friends with whatever that is that we worked ourselves into legitimately, and then learn how to back off and still do quality work without working ourselves to death.
mm,
We want to work ourselves into health. And so it's a constant dance to learn how to be a leader, but not work ourselves to death, because
yeah.
there's not enough of us to go around. There
Mm,
just isn't. And Gordy was referring to that when he talked about how he got into leadership. There's not enough to go around.
mm,
So we're always being asked, oh, there's a need here, there's a need there, and you have the specialties. Like, yeah, I have 40 specialties, but I can't do 40 things.
yeah.
So what can I do? And prayer and meditation is a really crucial part of this,
Mhm,
because in my tradition, I pray every single day.
mm,
I am here only to be truly helpful. I'm here to represent the one who sent me.
mm,
And so, what does that mean? Does that mean saying yes to everything? No, it doesn't mean saying, and then getting sick and collapsing. No, it
right.
doesn't mean that. So it's a constant, asking, inner reflection for guidance, paying attention to whatever illnesses we have as our inner smoke alarms are going, hey, you're pushing too hard,
Right.
back off, figure this out. And then figuring out what is the best balance for you, which may not be
Mhm,
the best balance for Gordy or the best balance for Wendy, but what's
right.
the best balance for me
Mhm.
to be able to continue.
Yes, so powerful and necessary. I love that it's on the card, on your letterhead, so you can keep it in the forefront, and this piece of your daily practice. So it's not like, oh, once I'm stressed out or once I'm overwhelmed, then I reach for this. But that approach to living, and this idea around having multiple gifts, but not needing to always multitask or not saying yes to everything. I went to a women's retreat a number of years ago, and it was so liberating. A woman named Rachel Potts, who was a presenter, said, just because you can do something doesn't mean it's your assignment. And that was so freeing because I kind of grew up with this teaching around, like, if people ask you to do something and you have the capacity or the skill set, it wasn't even capacity. If you had the skill set, you're supposed to say yes. And so learning how to say, like, is this really for me? And is it for me now? Right. So I love that just doing what I am, say, calling, vocation, purpose to do in this moment, and not outside of that. I love that. All right, Dr. Wendy, what would you tell us about balance in your journey?
Well, I actually think to practice balance and to practice real self-care is an act of leadership, particularly when folks look to you to have, there's a saying that the fish rots at the head, but it also lives at the head too. So if you're doing well, if you're living well, if you're showing care for yourself just internally, that's also a really positive example, but it also communicates to folks that who work with you or for you, that they should do the same, and to really craft a culture of care. For me, it's boundaries, nature, and the word no, which is an extension of boundaries. So it's just those three things. I recently relocated back to California, and on any number of days, you will catch me with trees or water.
Beautiful.
I need to do that. It really is centering for my soul. But I would say that above that, and above all else, and particularly during this time of the pandemic, which I think really whittled so much of our life practices down to the bare basics of what it means to care for yourself, as we had to cut away so much of the external. It was washing dishes and preparing food and cleaning my space and drinking water and it's just those basic things. That's the care. That, to me, that is what the real care is. And so and I know it's been overused, so I won't do it too, but there are lessons that come out of that we should still keep. And the slowness that we achieved, I think in our world, slowing down was an important thing for us to hold on to. So I try to do that as well.
Yeah, I love it. Connecting with nature, I always think about, because I'm not originally from California. When I first got here, it was like, oh my goodness, the mountains, like really, and I used to associate palm trees with vacation, right? So I'd say the palm trees, the mountains, and then you can get caught up and then you're just on the freeway driving.
That's right.
Right? You miss the awe of it. It's like, this is majestic, but now I'm like in the tunnel. And so reconnecting in that way. And as you said, that gift of no, and no is leadership. We often say, like, lean in, say yes, but saying no is a way of leading as well.
Yeah.
Dr. Gordy.
Yeah, I like what Wendy and Melinda said, and I was the one who said working hard was important, but I think working hard involves being efficient, and so I work hard, but I try to limit my work to what I think are the big questions. So what's really important here? What do I really want to go after and focus on? And what is really important here, and what is less important? And so I've learned to become very efficient and focus on those big questions, and try not to get distracted by peripheral issues. So there's always people asking you to do something, but what are the big issues? What's going to result in something? So as an academic, what was going to result in a high profile publication? I didn't always get there, but I was shooting for something that I thought was important, and shooting for the top rather than saying, well, I'm just going to do a bunch of things that are not that important, just sort of do things incrementally. I was always shooting for something big. And in so doing, I tried to control my time. So I have 3 adult children that are in their 20s. And while they're growing up, I was home every day in time for dinner and time to prepare dinner and spend time with them. And I realized that you can never get that time back when they're young. And so I really tried to protect my time with my family. And, on weekends, I seldom worked. And, maybe I didn't produce as much as some of my colleagues did, but I have, I have good family relationships, and I'm happy about that. Now I have a granddaughter, and I'm retired, so I have plenty of time to spend with her. But, while I was working, I really tried to protect my time and spend time with my children. And my students have been with my family and know how I operate. And I think they have good relationships too. And, in the end, it's not a matter of, how productive you were at work or how many publications you are or what the impact is. There's a broader impact in terms of your own life beyond. Someday you're going to retire, as I am, and what will you have to retire to? I know some people who just work and that's all they have, but I had my family, I had a life outside of work, and I'm really happy to spend more time on my life outside of work. So I think it's a matter of being efficient in your work and having time to spend with those who you love.
Yes, I love that. Being strategic and intentional and focused in the work that we do, as opposed to, as you said, just kind of scattered and saying yes to everything, and then really prioritizing our relationships. And it, makes a big difference. It is huge for us culturally and psychologically. What are the state of our relations? So thank you for naming that. For the sake of time, I'm going to combine our last two questions, and I'll start with you, Dr. Wendy, and I'm going to ask, given the context we are living in, the realities of the pandemic, the realities of oppression, political climate, what is one way that you would describe how effective leadership would show up in this particular season? And then one resource that you can share for those who want to learn more about leadership, whether a book or a website or anything you would like to share.
Okay. I think these times call for compassion and a much softer heart. I'm very mindful that people arrive with a lot of pain, and I have my own too, or my own vulnerabilities as well. But I just think we're all a little closer to the edge than we ought to be, or that we might want to be. And I think that leadership is a matter of really being heart forward and in a very in a caring way. I should have thought about this beforehand, and I did review the questions, I promise you.
It's
So when I'm
okay.
thinking about resources, I actually would just go back to prayer and meditation. I feel like that Melinda said that earlier, and I think that is a resource. It's a deep resource. It's endless, actually. And so I think when all else fails, just go be quiet and talk to the people who can hear you, and say what you need out loud so you can hear yourself and so it can be heard.
Yes, thank you for naming it. And it is a resource, our cultural resource, our spiritual resource, that we don't have to always get it from out there, but connecting with that source within. So really appreciate that. Dr. Melinda.
I think relevant leadership looks like what Wendy has already mentioned, which is the power of saying no. Like not role playing, actually modeling saying no, modeling saying, I'm going to do this, but I'm not going to do this, or I'm going to do this, and I put aside time in my day for hiking. I put aside time in my day for my family. I mean, it's one of the things why I started entering things in the state fair, because I wanted to be like a regular person. How many psychologists put shit in the state fair, right? So I wanted to just do that, and hanging out at the state fair with all the other cooking nerds, who are there, like, it was just so much fun, because ain't nobody in that group had a PhD. It was great. And so just like learning what it is to be a regular person in these times, and having a great deal of compassion for people around you as well as yourself. And I love what Wendy said about that. We're all more at the nearer to the edge than we'd like to be. Mm-hmm. And as far as things to read for relevant leadership, I think that I have two sources that anybody who emails with me has heard me mention over and over again. They're both African American women. One is Adrienne Marie Brown, and her newsletter, her blog. She is phenomenal. And what she's talking about is kind of showing up as yourself and not denying who you are, any part of who you are, and showing up as yourself very authentically, as Wendy has talked about. But she's an incredible thinker about systems and groups. And the other one is the NAP Ministry. You can access her on Instagram. And again, this woman is phenomenal, talking about how people of color have been worked to death so that resting is a radical act. And I just, both of these women, I cannot praise them enough. But as far as what I think, and I think that that learning the lessons that they have to teach is really essential to relevant leadership. Now, the last thing is, I guess I have two last things. One is, when you get spiritual guidance, to have a regular spiritual practice, when you get spiritual guidance, stop talking back. If your ancestors say, go do this, you go, well, you can say, well, I'm not sure how to do that, and you guys are going to have to guide me. But stop saying, no, it can't be me. You know? And so stop going, oh, I'm not good enough, I'm whatever. Listen to your spiritual guidance and follow through. So that's really, really important. And that's not in a book. I have not seen a single book that says that. And the other thing is that in my tradition, leadership is an apprenticeship. You apprentice with different people. And I haven't seen that in books either, although there are different programs that do model that. But anyway.
Oh, wonderful. I appreciate the resources that you've named, and the NAP ministry and the NAP bishop, as she calls herself. I think just yesterday she was posting about, we have to get out of this habit of saying, I need to rest or take care of myself so I can be more productive. You know, because again, it's just that idea of seeing ourselves as a tool, as an instrument, as a mule. And it's like resting because it's our divine right, to rest and be well and to receive, not just because it'll help me to be more of anything, right? That notion of already enough. We are enough. So thank you for that. And Dr. Gordy.
I've learned a lot about culturally relevant leadership from Asian American women. I say this because Asian American women are the least likely to be administrators in the sciences and engineering. But having said that, I think that Asian American women have a lot to contribute in terms of effective leadership styles. And unfortunately, because these leadership styles are not valued in the mainstream, they've not been given a chance. So the woman I'm thinking of, one is my wife, Jeannie Nagayama Hall, and I have two other colleagues who are administrators at the University of Washington. Mia Tuan is the Dean of the College of Education there. And then another woman, Sherry Mizumori, who was formerly the department chair in psychology at the University of Washington, who was actually a high school classmate and worked with my daughter, who was an undergraduate there. But what all these women have in common is a relational, collaborative style. And it's somewhat understated, but the focus is on forming relationships, checking in with people, working together. And that to me would be just a refreshing change from the types of leadership that I've experienced in different institutions that I've been involved in. It typically isn't collaborative. It's typically someone trying to advance an agenda, sometimes at the expense of others, rather than trying to do it as a community. And, as Melinda was saying before, people do get left behind, and that's just seen as collateral damage. Well, in this Asian American woman type of leadership, everybody does get included, and particularly those who are marginalized are prioritized. So I think that's a form of a new form of leadership that we need during the pandemic and beyond. We just have to leave behind some of our notions of what works and try something new. And I think this collaborative, relational approach to leadership has promise. And in terms of a resource, Dr. Thema mentioned Dr. Jean Lao Chin, the late Dr. Jean Lao Chin, and she has written about leadership. She has some books on this. She's an Asian American woman who I knew, and brings to her leadership style her cultural background as an Asian American woman.
Wonderful. So true. And I love that reminder of we can do it differently, and looking at different examples of what it means to lead, how to show up in leadership, that it does not, have to be this cookie cutter approach, and the importance of collaboration. And I just want to name in my homecoming podcast, which is a podcast for mental health, episode 65 is called Leading Well. And it gives us some pointers as we think about leadership. And I love that all of us come from marginalized, underrepresented groups, but groups that have in many ways equipped us to lead. And a reminder to those who are watching, kind of that catchphrase from the civil rights movement, if not us, who? And so sometimes we believe that we are not qualified, or we are not capable. And Sweet Honey and the Rock sing this song, "We are the ones we've been waiting for." So we're all looking for someone to lead our organizations forward, and we are the ones. So I am grateful for each of you for spending this Indigenous Day and Indigenous Peoples Day with us, and grateful for all of you who tuned in, asking that you will share this with your colleagues in social media or by email. And for those who are members of the American Psychological Association, to not forget to cast your ballot. You have until October 28th. And I am hoping that you will rank me number 1 for president-elect. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you all next time.